Thanks very much indeed, Malcolm. Thanks for that kind introduction. I don't know about a true friend. I feel like a bookend at the moment. We started off 3 days ago with an enormous anchor, which was Lord Cullen, giving his unique perspective on Piper and also his inquiry. And since then, on a sort of a metaphorical bookshelf, we've had lots of different books coming out from the plenary session here and from the breakout sessions as well. And I'm sort of right at the end. I'm the little bookshelf which is manfully trying to keep all those books from toppling over and providing you all with an opportunity to sort of review what you've heard over the last 3 days and perhaps reflect and take actions away. So the title of my talk is a review of the Cullen recommendations. Are they still relevant? So in the next 20 minutes, I'll try and cover those. You've seen this slide from various other people during the last 3 days. You know, the Cullen inquiry was really a sort of seminal inquiry for our industry. 106 detailed recommendations, and I'm not going to go through those. Just really highlight that there were in 5 key areas. There was the areas of the regulatory systems in the UK, management systems and control of work issues, control of hydrocarbons, management of emergency evacuation and response, and in fact probably the vast majority of the recommendations in that area, and then workforce engagement as well. So really what I'd like to try and do is get a sort of feel for how those lessons have actually been embedded here in the UK 25 years on. Well, let's talk about the regulatory regime. And I hope I'm not going to bore you by saying, well, we have a well-established safety case regime in the UK, and it's a goal-setting regime as well. But it wasn't a regime which just came out of Lord Cullen's recommendations, because we have scrutinised, we have tried to keep it alive. And after the initial set of regulations, we did a review in 2004, which involved a lot of consultation with industry, saying, have we got it right after we implemented the Cullen recommendations? And we refreshed our safety case regime. We, in fact, reduced the amount of QRA emphasis in the safety case, making the safety cases a lot more focused, really looking at the major hazard controls and making sure they were clear and consistent how they identified those things. We also changed the review process of safety cases. Rather than every 3 years you had to come back to ourselves as a regulator to get our acceptance, we decided it was much better to have a 5-year periodicity, and in fact you do that thorough review. You look back over the last 5 years to see the lessons that you've learnt in relation to your safety case, and look forward to the next 5 years to see the challenges and redo your safety case, review it to make sure it's still current. And post-Macondo, the system has been under considerable scrutiny by lots of people. We had the Select Committee in the House of Commons, and I think Sir Robert Smith is here. He took part of that. We've had the Independent Maitland Review, which a number of people have mentioned in their presentations, which also looked at our whole system. And then we had the European Commission getting in on the Act and having a European Commission consultative document looking at whether our sort of approaches were fit for purpose. And I'm really pleased to say that we got a really good feedback from each of those reviews saying that actually what we have in the UK does provide a fit for purpose and quite a rigorous and stringent regime for yourselves to adopt. And I think sort of people who copy you is a serious form of flattery. So thanks very much indeed, Jane Cutler, for acknowledging that sort of the Australian system is very much sort of based on our sort of approach of safety case and goal setting, and other countries have followed that as well. And the new European directive, which was only signed last week, uses our approach as a sort of a blueprint. It's not identical, but certainly a very, very familiar to all of you in the room here who operate on the UKCS. So, all very positive. But I'd hate this conference to be a sort of love fest for our safety case and goal setting regime, because it's not, and I'm very pleased that we had a number of significant speakers who gave us a bit of a warning sign. We had Andrew Hopkins on day one giving his approach on all the different building blocks which need to be there. It's not just the legislation, you need a lot more. Charles Haddon Cave giving his really a good explanation and presentation on his view. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us here to take those sort of views away and be careful, because unless safety cases are kept fresh, unless they really are working documents and not just excuses that you have to get through the regulator, then in fact the whole system crumbles. The safety case regime is so central, we need to make sure it really does work. So my view is that a good safety case is not pristine, it's not clean, but it's one that is well thumbed, that's lots of copies, people use it, it's a day-to-day document which is referred to and used throughout the process. Similarly with the thorough reviews, we've been disappointed, to be honest, in some operators. When you've done your thorough reviews, they've been initially perfunctory, they've used a lot of consultants to do that, haven't involved the workforce in an effective way. So it's really important that you do use your thorough reviews to refresh the safety cases, to keep them really on message and right. And also the verification process, which is part and parcel of the safety case regime, requiring you to identify the really key risk controls which you have on your particular installation, to decide what performance standards do you want for those controls to actually work, and to make sure you have an independent verification system to check that those systems would be available to operate as planned in the case of emergency. We also have had criticisms on that. You've put a lot of work into the verification scheme. It's so easy just to make it a sort of a tick, tick, tick. You've done it, thanks very much, DNV or Lloyds, etc. Go away and we'll forget about it. There's a lost opportunity there. So my message to you, and in fact my first challenge to you on the UK regulatory system, is for all of you to make sure that you go back and make sure that your safety cases are not just apologies. They are actually living documents which are used and really do help you steer your way through the major hazard risks which you have. Let's look at the second area which Cullen covered, which is management systems and work control. And hardly surprising after seeing the DVD yesterday, Remembering Piper, the whole issue of permit to work systems. And I think now, 25 years on, so much significant developments. We now have electronic systems coming out of your ears, 2 or 3 proprietary systems which are used, and well used throughout the industry. And yet, it's the view of the regulator, and I think also for you as the industry, that it is a key weakness still within the offshore industry. In our investigations and in your investigations, sort of poor isolation, poor adherence to procedures, poor communication of control measures is still a common thread through lots and lots of investigations, and that needs to be rectified. I'm really pleased that over the last 25 years, the whole issue of human and organisational factors has built up. We all know the 3 layers of graph. You've got plant, you've got processes, and then you've got people, and we're now dealing with the people issues in the industry. And so I'm really pleased that the industry has taken that forward, and issues such as a step change human factors group has done a lot, and there's a lot of people working in the field and trying to get those people issues out in the open and getting them resolved. They ain't easy. I'm really pleased that the recent APITO standard on control of work authorisation from performing authorities, the supervisors who really are the lifeblood of the permit to work systems, is now in place. And I'm also pleased that a number of you are beginning to query your permit to work systems, a bit like Bob Keeler did yesterday. He queried, hold on, we've got all these drop-down menus. You can be mesmerised with drop-down menus. You can tick, tick, tick. I think Les Linklater calls it the tick and flick approach to health and safety. Not very positive. It's the, never mind the quality, feel the width of the permit. How many papers can you get within one staple on a particular permit? How long can the queue be, in your permit system offshore? So I think that there is a real area for yourselves as an industry to look again closely at your permit to work systems. It may be you're overdoing it. Are you requiring permits for too many operations? They become common, they just become sort of part of the wallpaper. Maybe there's other ways of dealing with that to make sure you do focus on the real control for the real hazardous activities. So that's my second challenge to you, is for you to go back to your constituencies and consider, are your control of work processes really working? Are they really delivering you the assurance that you're covering those major activities which could create a catastrophic risk in the future? While I'm talking about management and systems and work control, remember the auditing criticisms which were in Lord Cullen's report. And in fact, the issue is now much wider than just audit, but it goes to the whole issue of safety leadership and the sort of information which safety leaders, and I talk about leaders throughout the management chain, get to get that assurance that what you think is being done is actually being done. We as the regulator, we had quite heavy criticisms of you in KP3 for your auditing processes. You know, it was death by audit, but were you getting much information from the audit? Were you using them to the right effect? We didn't think you were. And that concern about your assurance processes was also echoed in Maitland report about a year ago when implementation assurance shortcomings were identified. So an area for you to look forward to. I know you spend a lot of time in key performance indicators, and in some areas you're quite in the market leaders in key performance indicators, but make sure you're getting the real information, quality information, to make sure you can give yourself assurance. So what about hydrocarbon control? To be honest, a host of Cullen recommendations which have been implemented. So you could almost say, back in the box, we've dealt with that, guys, let's move on. But in fact, hydrocarbon releases is still on the agenda. It's widened up to sort of process integrity issues, and I'm really pleased that it still has a very high profile within the industry. I certainly commend the industry for the achievements which you've made over the last 3 years in achieving a 48% reduction in your hydrocarbon releases. That didn't just happen just by chance. You actually had to put a lot of work both at platform level, at company level, and at industry level. And I think that was really good, and thank you for putting that effort into it. But having said that, it needed the nudge and the challenge from me as the regulator for you to deal with that after having had a platform at quite a considerable, for quite a number of years. And even now, at about 46 major and significant hydrocarbon releases last year, you know, all of those incidents have the potential for escalation to fatalities, potential for escalating even further, you know, and that's not sort of good enough. And when I look and compare the UK with, say, Norway had 6 major and significant hydrocarbons last year compared to the 46 which we had in the UK. Now, apples and pears, you know, you can talk about how many platforms they've got, the type of fields, etc., but that's a pretty big gap between 2 countries in working in the same basin. So we must not be complacent about the level. And my third challenge is for you as the industry to make sure that you now accept further cuts, further reductions, further targets for your hydrocarbon releases. I know discussions are well advanced within the industry, looking at another 50% reduction over the next 3 years. I'm really looking forward for that to become accepted. So that's my third challenge to you. Let's get some further reductions in the hydrocarbon releases. Emergency evacuation and response, as I said at the start, probably the majority of the recommendations are on that. And likewise, I think the whole landscape of EER has changed, you know, compared to what we were like in Piper days. And certainly when we all looked at the video yesterday, you know, it was very moving to hear about those people who are unable to escape. And I'm really pleased that actually we have had that step change in improvements of the facilities offshore for emergency evacuation and response. And one of those is the temporary safe refuge. And that's so that we can have offshore a place which is protected from fire, protected from blast, protected from smoke, to allow there to be a safe place to control an incipient incident, to allow muster stations to give protection for workers before they decide how to evacuate the platform. And yet it's a real disappointment to us as a regulator that when I look over the last 5 years, at least once a year, we've had to do formal enforcement action against one or two against operators because of failures in their temporary safe refuge offshore. That would have been because the maintenance or testing of the TSRs was wrong. The damper performance in the vents was inadequate. And that shouldn't happen now, 25 years after Piper, considering the emphasis given in Cullen. So challenge number 4, go back to your installations tomorrow. Make sure you ask the questions. Is our TSR working? Is it maintained? Would it provide the protection if you needed it tomorrow? Last but not least, workforce engagement. And once again, I think we can be very, very positive. Another change compared to the old days back offshore. There's a real acceptance of the value of workforce engagement, and just some of the examples which I've got here on this slide. In the step change leadership team, a tripartite organisation where there's the operators, there's the full-time trade union officials, there's myself as regulators. There's also 12 individual safety reps there whose voice is loud, whose voice is heard. Now that is amazing involvement of safety reps at the highest level of the industry's drive towards safety. So a real step forward. Sort of safety reps of the year are celebrated. We have safety reps of the year on platforms, in companies, even for the whole industry in the oil and gas awards. Real celebration of people who give their time voluntary, difficult, but really make a difference. We've got the workforce engagement toolkit coming out and is being launched, and that should provide the 4th key performance indicator for the whole industry, and an important one which will measure the quality of workforce engagement. And we can then take action both at platform level, operator level, and industry level. And even the Piper 25 workforce event, which Les just gave you a little brief about, that was fantastic yesterday. 550, workers came here to learn and study and discuss about Piper issues. Fantastic level of workforce engagement. But I'm a regulator. I was born to be miserable, and I will be miserable because you're still not doing enough. When we had our inspection project in 2011, looking at compliance of safety reps and safety committees, we found some companies really up there, really adopting those, really going beyond compliance. We found some other companies pretty low at the bottom. Real gap, real areas where the poorer companies can learn and really embed safety reps and workforce engagement and safety committees. Another disappointment is that we've only just got the new revised training standards for safety reps to make sure the safety reps don't just do the bare minimum, but they're given the tools to actually really be a force for change and to actually be professional in the work they do, professional in the influence they do. We've now got that. We've got the training courses up and running. We want to make sure those are adopted. And my last question on this slide is, what does engagement mean? Workforce engagement. It can mean all or nothing. It's very easy to say, yep, we're into workforce engagement. Tick, right, guys. We need to dig below that. And my 5th challenge for you is about the engagement of your workforce in the process safety issues. It's pretty easy to engage your workforce in slips, trips and falls, occupational safety, but to really get and mine the information that you've got in your workforce on process safety issues, to get them involved in thorough reviews, to get them involved in HAZOPs, to get them involved in material changes to a safety case or managing sort of permit to work type systems is the key. So that's my last challenge to you today, is make sure that you have got your workforce engaged on the process safety issues. That's the challenge. You're not all doing it at the moment. You need to do it. But when we look back 25 years at Cullen, there's a feeling of ennui. Hold on, that was all really obvious, wasn't it? Everything, all those 106 recommendations. Surely in those days, a prescriptive, narrow legislative regime, surely they didn't consider that was sufficient for a major hazard industry. Surely sort of competence and training and communication and safe isolations were so fundamental for permit to work systems. And surely meaningful involvement of the workforce just You know, it was so obvious. Why didn't they do it at the time 25 years ago? So there, if Homer Simpson is worried, I think you need to be worried. I think Judith Hackett quoted Charles Darwin, so I'm afraid I'm going down the other end of the scale here. So if we didn't get it right then, are we going to get it right now? You know, are we identifying the incipient problems which people in the future will say, oh, why didn't our guys in 2013 understand that? Chronic unease, that's what we need, chronic unease. And we're looking in the future, you know, the findings continue to be obvious. You know, Texas City, you know, the whole issue of process safety leadership, you know, surely that's obvious now. Deepwater Horizon, you know, how on earth did we manage to make ourselves so blind that we thought we didn't need a subsea capping device? Now it just seems so obvious. Why didn't we think about it? We need to be careful. We also need to recognise that with any inquiries, any review, there's also a tendency to resolve the problems from the past, not for the future. You know, when you consider Lord Cullen's review, it didn't cover any environmental issues, and yet environment and safety integrity are now so inextricably linked. It didn't cover anything about wells, such a central part of operations. It didn't cover anything about modules. So we need to be aware of that and be aware that the game keeps changing. And when we look at the new reality which you're having to face in the UK, you know, we've got ageing infrastructure and a mature basin. We've got more challenging reservoirs and new technologies. So where's the next problem going to come? We've got new players. We've got a global industry coming in. You know, where's the problems going to be? And nowadays, if you have a risk, it's not just the worry of killing some of your workers offshore. You could destroy your company. And some of the companies who've had incidents recently have gone very nearly to the wall, as I'm sure someone has said. So be careful about the business risks as well, another driver. And there's also a driver for much more transparency and also to share between companies, between countries and globally. Real challenges. So my conclusions. My exam question was, are the Cullen recommendations still relevant? Piper Alpha was an industry-changing event, a once-in-a-generation event, and Lord Cullen's report really embedded those changes. Had a massive effect on the UK continental shelf, and it went wider. It's had a massive effect globally in the offshore industry. Things like goal setting and a safety case approach has stood the test of time, and it's the blueprint for others. So a great legacy and relevant. However, some Piper issues, 25 years on, are still resistant to resolution. We're still having new accidents for old reasons. We still have particular challenges remaining. The challenges of embedding the safety case approach really into your safety management system, of making sure your control of work systems really do work and are not just drowning in paperwork, to make sure your temporary safe refuges really do provide a safe refuge, to make sure your hydrocarbon leases continue coming down until you can really be assured you haven't got a risk, and to make sure that your workforce involvement really is real involvement, particularly in process safety risks. So the lessons from Piper Alpha have to remain. They have to remain as a stark reminder for our industry of what can go wrong offshore, and that we all have very great responsibilities to make sure that such a catastrophe can't happen again. Thank you.